Hello everybody, welcome to Fundamentals of Architecture Design. I'm Alex Ruiz and I'll be your instructor. I'm going to show you guys a few of my images. I do mainly conceptual design for games, TV, and film and things like that, but what I'm going to show you guys can be applied to any genre, graphic novel or just online content, and even real world design. So we're going to look at a lot of really cool and interesting real world architecture and put our own spin on it. Kind of really bring it into the imaginary world. So I'll show you guys all of the basic techniques that I use, and then we'll get into a lot of advanced techniques. And you guys are really going to see that I use a handful of techniques pretty much in every image. Every image is built on just very basic fundamentals, and as long as we can grasp those, we can have pretty successful images. So that wraps that up. Let's jump right into it. Okay guys, so let's look at the definition of architecture. Architecture is the process and the product of designing and constructing buildings. Architectural works with a certain indefinable combination of design quality and external circumstances may become cultural symbols and or be considered works of art. Fairly technical explanation, but it's kind of all there. Let's just look at a few other descriptions. So we have the art and science, or the action and process of designing and constructing buildings. The design activity of the architect, the profession of designing buildings. A building designed by an architect, the end product of architectural design. A building whose design transcends mere function, a unifying or coherent form or structure. The expression of thought in a building. I really like that one. It's very simple and kind of artistic. A group or body of buildings in a particular style, and a particular style or way of designing buildings. So you can basically go through each one of these and kind of dissect it. But basically, what it all boils down to is this. Architecture is art you can live and work in. Pretty simple. So that's basically what we're going to be designing, is places that people live in and work in and everything in between. So let's just look at a quick class overview. In the 8-week class, we're basically going to be covering a lot of really cool and interesting stuff. So just to quickly go over each week. So week 1, we have Asian architecture. Week 2, Indian architecture. Week 3, ancient architecture. Week 4, classical architecture. Week 5, medieval architecture. Week 6, Renaissance architecture. Week 7, modern architecture. And week 8, futuristic architecture. So we're going to be covering a lot of ground, a lot of different cultures. You guys are going to have, in the end, a lot of really cool, very distinguishable types of sketches and, if you have time, finished renderings. But we're going to be focusing a lot on sketches. But now I want to show you guys how each one of these weeks basically applies to projects that have already been done. So, a quick overview again. There's the week 1 Pagoda. You guys are all familiar. Kung Fu Panda. Week 2, Indian architecture. Even though in Aladdin, and here's a good example of taking certain liberties with the architecture. Look how much the Aladdin castle looks like the Taj Mahal. It's, loosely somewhat based on it. So we can, take certain liberties. We don't have to produce the exact same thing for one piece of architecture and then produce it for entertainment. We can mix and match things. That's the beauty of all this. Egypt and Prince of Egypt. So basically every one of these films has referenced traditional architecture. Here we have Gladiator, referencing, of course, old ancient Rome. Hunchback of Notre Dame by Disney, of course, referencing the original. Assassin's Creed, referencing in one of the games, referencing kind of the Renaissance period. Here we go for modern architecture. There we are with Incredibles. Let me kind of zoom into that. Here's a Frank Lloyd Wright, and then here's a very Frank Lloyd Wright-esque kind of home in Incredibles, so you know that they were referencing that. And then futuristic architecture. This is a real world architecture. This exists today, but look how futuristic that is. That is a Calatrava building, and we'll really get into his architecture and seeing how that influences the sci-fi. Okay, so as far as the main points we're going to cover and that what you guys are going to see in this class. So I'm going to show you how to collect good reference material. We're going to sketch from that reference. We're going to sketch from imagination, of course, which is based off of that reference, but we can take that and kind of riff on that. We're going to incorporate reference into the work to give it a realistic look, and then we can finalize some of the designs for presentation, for portfolio, for your website, all that good stuff. So, week 1, we're going to be focusing on pagodas, which are very iconic, Asian architecture. So, in this class, I'm going to show you how to. And then again, I'm going to repeat a lot of things so you guys can kind of get it instilled into your brains. Repetition is one of the key things of how you're going to get better. So again, collecting good reference material. I'm going to show you guys how to search for good reference, and then of course collect it, and then of course sketching from that reference, having pieces of the reference up while you sketch on your computer, and then being able to sketch from imagination, being able to kind of put the reference away or just put it aside, not even look at it, and just kind of use your own imagination to come up with sketches based off of the reference. I'm going to show you guys how to incorporate the reference photography into your work for that realistic element, and then of course finalizing the designs. Okay, so what you guys can expect out of the class. This is actually this week's project. I did a screenshot of it, and I'll go over everything in very fine detail so you guys can see how I created this, but let me just kind of zoom in pretty quickly. So we're going to come up with sketches based off of reference. We're going to also be able to combine those sketches. So this is a great thing, and not a lot of people do this. Being able to sketch out a bunch of different sketches, and then literally by placing them over one another on different layers, you can come up with new and really interesting designs that you never would have thought of. Then we're going to kind of go in and just finalize some of the designs. We're not going to go crazy rendering here. We're just going to kind of put an image on a page like I did here and just kind of define it a little bit more. Same with this one here, just define a little bit more, define more, maybe some atmosphere in between to give it a lot of depth. And then just putting the photographic reference on there and then kind of painting over it. A lot of concept artists do this, probably 90% concept artists do this. And then again, this is very loose, but it's for the initial impression, because when you look at it, you kind of get what it is. You kind of get the feeling of depth, you get atmosphere, and the rest would be just cleaning this up just with a regular regular brush and cleaning things up. So I'm going to show you guys how to kind of come up with this. So this is what you guys are going to expect to have at the end of the week. So again, just to kind of reiterate, we're going to create a large amount of sketches from reference. We're going to sketch from imagination. We're going to refine and emphasize design, and then finalize loosely a design. And if you have more time, you can finalize as many as you'd like. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at some reference material and talk about the theory of all of this. Okay, so let's get into part one of the lecture, which is theory. And basically all that means is the researching aspect of it. So collecting good reference, ideation while researching, keywords in searching. These are just things that we want to think about while we're collecting material. So for instance, this week in Pagodas, we want to collect obviously good reference, but we want to think of other things that can help us come up with interesting designs, and thinking of other words that can help us in finding that reference. So let me show you guys a couple of images, rather a lot of images. And you guys can, this comes with the download, so you guys will have access to all of these images. And these are images that I found while typing in Pagoda in a Google or Bing search. And so we have our classic pagodas here, but I found this really interesting. This is the Indy 500 Raceway, which they built obviously after a pagoda design. And so that got me looking at the actual word pagoda. The actual word basically means tiered tower. Tower that is tiered. That's basically what this is. So technically that is a pagoda, even though it's not Asian per se. It is technically a pagoda. So this is a pagoda in I believe it's Indonesia, and again, it really doesn't have that classic kind of pagoda look, but you will see images that come up like this, and you see a tiered aspect, say right in there. It's that repeatable element that kind of is stacked. In this case, it's stacked horizontal. So that's a cool way to think of a pagoda, not always vertical. So there's lots of great reference in here. There's classic pagoda right there. Again, this came up when I was looking for pagoda, and we kind of see one right in there. And again, stacked horizontal. So it gets you thinking of things that are not your typical stacked upright pagoda. But most of the time we're going to have these elements here. There's one, repeated, smaller, repeated, smaller. It's kind of classic pagoda. Larger shape, repeated, smaller, repeated, smaller. So when we're drawing these things out, we want to think like that. So here's a few images of pagoda in film. And so this is from Sucker Punch. And again, there's the pagoda-esque, say an entrance back there. That's not necessarily a pagoda. But then here we have in the poster for the film, there is a giant classic pagoda back there of one particular style, and then right next to it, there's another one of a different style. Here we have Kung Fu Panda, the game, but of course the same stuff was in the movie. We have pagodas back there, and again you can just kind of see that they're these stacked, tiered towers. Here's like a pagoda kind of entrance kind of element. So we don't always have to make an actual structure that people live in or work in. Here's something that can be an entrance to a structure. Some more pagodas from Kung Fu Panda. Now we're getting into games. So this is from World of Warcraft, Mist of Pandaria, if you guys ever play that. you're going to see a lot of Asian architecture and a lot of pagodas. Here's pretty much what the bottom of a pagoda can look like. And what's really cool is that they're pillars holding the pagoda up. So we don't always have to have a blocky structure. They can have kind of pillars holding it up so you can actually see in between the pillars. This is another game, and here's a really cool looking pagoda, something that you usually don't see when you're looking at classic pagodas. And another characteristic that pagodas always or mostly have, I wouldn't say always, is if we go back to that first one, that kind of spiked element at the end. You kind of see it a lot. There's the spiked element. So you not only have this repeatable roof tiered element, but you have this kind of spiked curved element at the end. It's probably not the easiest thing to build in real life, but to draw it, yeah, no problem. I pulled this up. This just came up in the search, and I thought, how cool is this for, again, the ideation of searching for reference images. Since we're doing pagodas, and technically pagoda is a tiered tower, I mean, look at all this stuff that essentially is tiering up. And again, the word tier is spelled T-I-E-R. It's not like teardrop, it's tier. Little verbal lesson there, grammar. So you can see that this would be a cool reference image to have up while you're sketching your pagodas. Why not have a pagoda in a tree? You know, why does it always be a straight up structure? Why can't it curve and do things like this? So these are things we want to have while we're sketching. Here is, if you guys ever seen the movie The Usual Suspects, this was a really cool backdrop in one of the scenes. And it's actually pretty massive. It doesn't really look like it here, but it's massive. And this is in LA. Another real world kind of pagoda-esque Asian architecture, the Man's Chinese Theater in LA as well. So we get these things in film, games, real world film, and then just real world architecture. I mean, this is a physical place. You can go inside, and it's a very popular spot in Hollywood. Okay, so here's a really interesting tiered tower. It looks nothing like Asian architecture, but just imagine if you started to put kind of spiked ends on these things. It would immediately become an Asian pagoda. You know, get rid of Ohio, of course, and all this stuff, and put some really cool Asian characters on this thing, and then it's a pagoda. See, when you look at this and this, very similar. Here's a really, really cool tiered tower, basically. Again, this is where the ideation in researching really comes in handy. If you were to design a pagoda that is rounded like this, that would be incredibly original, as opposed to that, which is great too. And it also depends on what you're being asked for. So I want you guys to do normal pagodas like this, kind of original pagodas, but also I want you guys to kind of branch out and do interesting things like this as well. Again, this is kind of a bell tower pagoda. They don't always have to be places that you can go inside. Putting statues outside is a very classic way of designing a scene with a pagoda in it. It's one of the things I did in the kind of final sketch that you guys will kind of see me create. Here's the Indy 500 as it is today. They really modernized this pagoda, and it's really, really cool. Look at that. There's something about the stacked element, and then it's also protruding out, so you get some really cool silhouette happening. If you squint your eyes and look at this, see all of that cool negative and positive shapes happening, things cutting out into the sky. It kind of looks very it's very powerful looking, and in some cases it can look menacing. It can look evil, but it can also look beautiful. Again, this is really cool. It's a tiered tower, not necessarily Asian, but again, if you just um, put those spikes at the edges of these things, it can become of Asian architecture. Some cool inner detail of the underneath part of the roof. Um, we're not going to be getting this close, but just to know what's underneath this, we are thinking about architecture as well, of course. So it's good to know how this thing is built from the inside. And that's pretty cool. A house kind of, well, yeah, looks like a house, but it's really, in some ways, it's almost going back to the art that you can live in. There's probably no real reason to have it like this. It would have been a lot easier just to build it straight up, but this is an artistic choice. An artist designed this building, and it has an aesthetic that is way more pleasing than just a very boxy, square kind of building. Here's an extreme example of the spikes at the edge of a pagoda. And again, these things really swoop way up. So you guys can get, crazy with your designs. They can kind of really curve out at the ends. And then you have your classic straight all the way across with a little bit of curve at the end. So there's lots of variation that you guys are going to see in these photos. So let me take you guys through the next step of the ideation. Classic table. And again, this came up when I was typed in tiered tower, and a tiered table came up. And then it got me thinking, this is great, because if you guys can really imagine this as the main structure underneath all of your pagodas, or basically anything you design, a very basic foundation, it's easy to sketch stuff on top of this. Another tiered table. And so I just really started looking for tiered furniture. This is another really cool example, and you can just imagine it. You can just see it on here by putting elements of this to this. And then I started finding more and more funky kind of furniture. This is a tiered piece of furniture, and you can see how these things are offset. And you can imagine these at different sizes, and you can imagine people on them, and you can imagine lots of crazy things just from a very simple piece of wooden furniture. Same kind of thing. This one I really liked, and I kind of turned this into one of the sketches I did. And it really has that very strong sense of foundation, and it's just incredibly simple. Incredibly simple. Here's another version of a tiered table. This is another thing I sketched from in the demo that you'll see. And again, you can really see basically the skeleton of a building right here. And it's also just really cool how the design, where these legs kind of snap in and screw into other parts. It's very clearly visible. So looking at things like this is really going to help you design a building. And you want to know what else is going to help you design a building? A cake. When I saw this, I was just like, this is amazing. I did sketch from this as well. Look at how offset this is, how this rotates off. So we have this at the bottom, it's normal, and then shrunken down and then rotated here. And then another shrunken piece rotated back. Very, very cool. Then I started looking at awesome cat condos. So here's the ideation in research alone can be a lot of fun, because you're going to kind of stumble onto images when you type in certain keywords. So again, going back to tiered tower, it gave me a lot of tiered or one image of a tiered table, and then I thought, okay, tiered furniture, right? So I typed that in and got all this really cool stuff. Then I thought, okay, what else is tiered? I just typed in tiered objects. Cakes are tiered, basically. I mean, look at that, one stacked on top of one another. And so this is a great, very simple foundation if you're doing kind of Tim Burton-y, kind of whimsical, curvy kind of elements. Tiered cat condo, which is awesome. Again, the tiered objects going up, and look how they're held together just by a couple of pieces of wood. It's pretty amazing, pretty simple. More tiered cat condos. This is an epic tiered cat condo. I would love to live there if it was big enough. Here's that same cat condo from the side. And again, you can imagine the pagoda-esque kind of roof on each one of these little tiers. So this is where you can let your imagination run by just looking at photography. Look at that curved top of that. And then straight. So we got curved, a couple of straights, and then kind of a boxy foundation at the bottom. Here's a cool little fountain that is tiered. So you guys are going to get reference and inspiration from all of these different photos. That essentially these are not pagodas, none at all. And so there's a lot more pagoda reference that I put in here. Here's a great one from Minecraft, if you guys know of that game. So by looking at all these photos, you can really see and kind of get what a pagoda is. And in its basic essence, it's a very simple stacked structure. Here's a house that kind of has that pagoda-esque look, even though it looks nothing like a pagoda. It is a stacked, tiered-esque kind of tower. This is a really cool kind of futuristic, modern yet futuristic version of a pagoda. So you can really kind of go to town on all of these things and really kind of research a lot of interesting things. So I'm going to leave that up to you guys as far as what keywords you can type in. So again, you type in pagoda, Great Wall of China here, and if you see some of the Great Wall imagery, not a lot. So there is, kind of a little mini pagoda on the Great Wall, which is pretty cool. There's not a lot on it, but towards the end of the Great Wall, then you have these really beautiful pagodas. Okay, so let's start to get into sketch mode. So in the next demo, I'm going to be sketching from this reference material, coming up with new and interesting versions, but really sticking with that classic pagoda. So see you guys at part 2. Okay, welcome to part 2. So this will be the demo. So I'll show you guys my sketch process of how I created all the sketches I showed you in the previous lecture and from the reference material. So again, I'm going to be sketching from reference and then the ideation while sketching, combining those sketches, and then refining a few of those sketches. So let's get to it. Okay, here we go. So I just grabbed a regular document, went to File, New, and just grabbed a 8.5 by 11 and kind of maybe cropped out a little bit. I want you guys to just pull up whatever you've been comfortable using as far as document size. So here I'm just sketching in some basic shapes and looking at the reference on the left and just trying to get a feel for just the basic shapes. Once we get those down, we can start putting in details and stuff. So there's that house on the left. I thought that was really cool. And